I never thought this could happen to me, but it did. I died. And what awaited me on the other side was something I could have never imagined. Hell. The suffocating heat, the endless screams, the crushing darkness that swallowed every trace of hope. Everything I thought I knew about life and death shattered in an instant. What I saw and felt there left scars so deep, I can barely find the words to describe them. What you're about to hear might completely change the way you see life, your purpose, and what happens after we take our final breath. The hell I experienced wasn't just a place, it was a reality so vivid and terrifying. It felt like it would last forever. Every moment of that experience is etched into my soul like an open wound that refuses to heal. But before we dive into the most chilling parts of my story, let me tell you this, it doesn't end in despair. Despite the pain and suffering, there's something incredible I need to share with you. To truly understand it, though, you need to know what led me there. My journey didn't start on that day. It began long before it all went wrong. My name is Kaleb, and up until that day, I thought I had life all figured out. I wasn't a bad person, at least not in my eyes. I worked hard, paid my bills, and kept to myself. God? Heaven? Hell? Honestly, those things didn't cross my mind much. Life was about getting by, not worrying about what came after. But looking back now, I see how blind I was. I had no idea how much my choices, or lack of them, would matter. It was a regular Tuesday night. I had just finished a long shift at work and was heading home. My car was old, the kind that rattled if you drove it too fast, but it got me where I needed to go. The streets were slick from the rain, and I was tired, too tired to notice the headlights speeding toward me. Everything happened so fast, a loud crash, the sound of metal twisting, and then silence. I remember the cold. My body felt heavy, pinned in the wreckage, but that wasn't the worst part. I could see myself. My body was still in the car, motionless, yet I was somehow standing outside, looking at the scene. That's when it hit me, I was dead. The panic set in immediately. This couldn't be real. I wasn't ready to die. I hadn't done anything important with my life. People started to gather around the crash. I could hear their voices, muffled and distant, like I was underwater. Someone shouted, "Call 911." Another said, "There's no pulse." Those words pierced me like a dagger. No pulse? No heartbeat? That's when I realized I wasn't going back. Whatever this was, it wasn't a dream. I felt this strange pull, like something was dragging me away from the scene. It wasn't violent, but it was firm, like there was no choice but to follow. I tried to resist, screaming for someone to help me, but no one could hear me. My cries were swallowed by the growing darkness around me. I'd never felt so powerless, so small. The darkness was overwhelming, but there was something else, an eerie silence. It wasn't peaceful, it was suffocating. My mind raced with questions. Where was I going? What was happening to me? Every fiber of my being wanted to turn back, but it was like I was on a conveyor belt, being carried somewhere I didn't want to go. And then I saw it, a faint glow in the distance. At first, I thought it might be heaven, a place of light and peace. But as I got closer, the light wasn't warm. It was fiery. The air grew thick, almost unbreathable, and the screams began. They weren't just sounds. They were agonizing cries of despair that tore through me. That's when the realization hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't heaven. I wasn't being welcomed into the arms of angels. I was being dragged toward something far worse, something I didn't even believe existed until that moment. This was hell, and I was heading straight for it. I wanted to fight, to run, to do anything to escape, but it was too late. The darkness had me, and the fire was growing closer. This was only the beginning of my torment. Leaving my body felt surreal, like I was floating, but it wasn't peaceful. There was this unbearable heaviness, like invisible chains pulling me downward. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it, an overwhelming presence, cold and oppressive, surrounding me. My mind was screaming to wake up, to snap out of whatever nightmare this was. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a dream. Then came the silence, absolute, suffocating silence. It wasn't the kind that brings peace. It was the kind that presses into your chest, making it hard to breathe. I tried to call out, but my voice didn't work. The stillness wrapped around me like a thick fog, and for the first time, I felt truly alone. Suddenly, I wasn't floating anymore. It was like I had been dropped into something. The ground, or whatever it was beneath me, was coarse and hot, like burning coals under my feet. My senses were overwhelmed. The air smelled like sulfur, sharp and acrid, and every breath felt like swallowing ash. I didn't want to move, but I couldn't stay still. The darkness around me wasn't just an absence of light. It was alive, pulsing like it had a heartbeat. I tried to focus, to make out shapes or anything recognizable, but all I could see were faint shadows shifting in the distance. And then there were the screams, faint at first, like whispers carried by the wind, but they grew louder, piercing and desperate, as if they were coming from every direction. My instinct was to run, but where? There was no way to know what was ahead or behind me. It felt like I was walking in circles, each step sinking into the burning ground. The air grew heavier with every breath, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't escape. Panic began to set in, the kind that makes your chest tighten and your mind race. In the distance, I noticed a faint glow. For a split second, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe it was a way out, a light to guide me. But as I moved closer, the glow became more like a fire, angry and flickering, casting eerie shadows that made the darkness around it seem even more alive. The heat grew more intense with every step, burning my skin, but I couldn't stop. I didn't want to move toward it, but something was pulling me, like invisible hands forcing me forward. I wanted to scream, to fight whatever was dragging me closer, but my body wouldn't listen. As I neared the fire, the screams became deafening. They weren't just sounds anymore, they were tangible, vibrating in my chest and tearing into my mind. And then I saw them, shapes writhing in the flames, their outlines blurred by the heat. The sight was horrifying, but what struck me most was their eyes. Even from a distance, I could feel their hopelessness, their agony. It hit me then. This wasn't a place I'd stumbled into. It wasn't some random nightmare. This was deliberate, calculated, and I was part of it now. I didn't know how or why, but one thing was certain. I wasn't in control anymore. The heat was unbearable, but it wasn't like the heat of a fire you might know. It was deeper, like it seeped into your very being, scorching something far more than just flesh. The air itself seemed to ripple with malice, heavy and suffocating. The walls, if I could even call them that, weren't solid or stable. They pulsed, almost like they were alive, radiating a sense of pure evil that made my stomach churn. Everywhere I looked, the shadows shifted and danced, though there was no light to create them. It was as if the darkness had its own life, writhing and twisting just out of reach. I wanted to turn away, to close my eyes, but even that brought no relief. The images were burned into my mind, and they weren't going anywhere. And then there were the sounds. The screams I'd heard earlier were nothing compared to this. They were louder, sharper, more anguished. Each cry carried an unbearable weight of pain and regret. But what struck me most wasn't the pain, it was the hopelessness. Every sound, every voice, was drenched in a despair so deep it was almost tangible, like you could reach out and touch it. Mixed with the screams were whispers, low and sinister, like they were speaking directly to me. The words weren't clear, but their tone was unmistakable, mocking, accusing, and filled with hatred. It felt like they knew every terrible thing I'd ever done, every regret I'd buried deep. Those whispers cut deeper than any scream. As I moved, or maybe was pulled further into this place, figures began to take shape in the shadows. At first, they were just outlines, blurry and indistinct. But the closer they got, the more detailed they became. They weren't like the monsters you see in horror movies. They were worse. Their forms were grotesque, twisted in ways that made no sense, but it was their faces that haunted me. Each face seemed to carry 1,000 stories of pain and horror. Eyes sunken and lifeless, mouths twisted in silent screams. Some looked like they'd been human once, but whatever humanity they'd had was long gone. They didn't just look at me. They stared through me, as if they could see every dark corner of my soul. They didn't speak, but their presence was overwhelming, like a suffocating weight pressing down on me. It wasn't just fear I felt. It was shame, guilt, regret, all crashing over me in waves. It was as if every wrong decision I'd ever made was being laid bare, exposed for all to see. The ground beneath me seemed to shift and crack, and I could feel heat rising from below, intensifying with every step. The air was thick with the smell of sulfur and something else, something rotten, decaying, like the very essence of death. Every breath felt like poison, burning my lungs and making me gag. And yet, the worst part wasn't the heat or the darkness or the figures around me. It was the feeling that I didn't belong to myself anymore. This place wasn't just about pain. It was about complete and total loss of hope, of identity, of everything. It was as if I was no longer Kaleb. I was nothing. I was trapped. I felt trapped, like a caged animal with no way out. The weight of everything I'd ever done wrong pressed down on me, suffocating me. There was no escaping it, no denying it. Every lie, every selfish act, every moment I chose my own desires over what was right, they were all there, as vivid as the fire around me. It was like my mistakes had come to life, taunting me, reminding me why I was here. The worst part was that I couldn't argue with it. I knew I deserved this. Every decision I'd brushed off, every time I thought it doesn't matter, had led me here. The regret was overwhelming, cutting deeper than any physical pain could. I wanted to turn it off, to shut it out, but it wouldn't stop. It was as if this place thrived on my shame, feeding on my despair. I tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The ground beneath me shifted like it was alive, pulling me deeper into the suffocating heat. The screams around me grew louder, merging into a horrifying symphony of agony. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. It was like the sound was inside me, echoing in my chest, in my soul. And then it hit me, the realization that I might never leave. This wasn't a temporary punishment. This wasn't something I could endure and then escape. It was forever. That word sank into me like a blade. Forever. No second chances, no way to fix it, no way to go back. The thought was unbearable. In the depths of that hopelessness, something inside me snapped. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't take the screams, the heat, the weight of my own guilt. I fell to my knees, my hands gripping the searing ground as if I could hold myself together. And then, without even thinking, I screamed. But this wasn't an ordinary scream. It wasn't out of anger or frustration. It was raw, desperate, the kind of cry that comes from deep inside when you've got nothing left. "Help me," I shouted, my voice cracking, echoing into the darkness. "I can't do this. Please, someone, anyone help me." For a moment, nothing changed. The heat, the darkness, the despair was all still there, crushing me. But then, something shifted. It was subtle at first, like the faintest breeze cutting through the suffocating air. It wasn't cool or refreshing, but it was different. It was stillness. The screams seemed to fade, just slightly, and the darkness around me felt less alive, less suffocating. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. Something was happening. My heart raced, not with fear this time, but with something I hadn't felt in what seemed like an eternity. Hope. And then, in that stillness, I heard it. A voice. It wasn't loud, and it wasn't like the whispers that had tormented me before. It was calm, steady, and powerful. It didn't come from outside, it came from within. "You are not forgotten," it said. And in that moment, everything changed. In the middle of that overwhelming darkness, something changed. At first, it was just a faint glimmer, barely visible through the shadows. But as I focused on it, the light grew stronger. It wasn't harsh or blinding. It was warm, inviting, and so different from the suffocating heat I'd been trapped in. This light didn't just cut through the darkness. It seemed to fill every corner of my being, exposing parts of me I'd tried to hide even from myself. I froze, unsure if I should move toward it. The light didn't feel like it was forcing me. It was calling me gently, like it was offering a way out. And then I felt it, a presence unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't just around me. It was inside me, surrounding me completely. For the first time since this nightmare began, I didn't feel alone. A voice followed, clear and strong, yet filled with a love I couldn't comprehend. It wasn't like the mocking whispers or the cries of despair I'd heard before. This voice carried a weight of authority, but also tenderness, like a parent speaking to a lost child. "You are not forgotten," it said again, but this time it wasn't just words. It was a promise. Tears streamed down my face, though I hadn't realized I was crying. I wasn't sure if they were tears of relief, regret, or something else entirely. The voice spoke again, this time louder, more deliberate. "You still have a chance." Those words hit me like a tidal wave. A chance? After everything I'd done? After the choices that had led me here? I wanted to respond, to say something, but I couldn't find the words. My mind raced with questions, guilt, and a tiny spark of hope. The light grew brighter, almost as if it were reaching out to me, pulling me toward it. I felt a force, gentle but firm, lifting me out of the pit I'd been trapped in. It wasn't easy. It felt like every part of me was being stripped away, exposed, and rebuilt at the same time. The darkness fought to hold on to me. I could feel it clawing at my soul, trying to drag me back, but the light was stronger. With every pull toward the light, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. It wasn't just the darkness that was being left behind. It was the shame, the guilt, the regrets. As I moved closer to the light, the screams and whispers faded into the distance. The suffocating heat was replaced by a warmth that didn't burn but healed. The air became lighter, easier to breathe, and for the first time, I felt a peace I couldn't explain. It wasn't just the absence of pain. It was the presence of something greater, something holy. I knew then what was happening. This wasn't just an escape, it was a rescue. I wasn't leaving that place because I deserved to. I was leaving because someone had reached down and pulled me out. I didn't know why or how, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't doing this on my own. And then as the light completely enveloped me, I heard the voice one last time. "You are mine." Those words echoed in my soul, more powerful than anything I'd ever felt. In that moment, I knew I'd been given a second chance, not because I earned it, but because of a grace I couldn't begin to comprehend. I was no longer lost. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw was the bright, sterile light of a hospital room. At first, I couldn't process where I was or how I'd gotten there. Nurses and doctors buzzed around me, their voices blending into a hum of urgency. I caught bits and pieces. "He's stable. It's a miracle. We didn't think he'd make it." But none of that mattered. I knew exactly why I was alive. The weight of everything I'd experienced hit me all at once. Tears streamed down my face, not from fear or pain, but from overwhelming gratitude. I wasn't supposed to be here. By all logic, I should have been gone forever, trapped in that horrible place. But God, He had pulled me out. He had given me another chance, one I didn't deserve, but would never take for granted. The doctors told me I'd been unresponsive for hours. My heart had stopped at the scene of the accident, and they'd almost called it. They couldn't explain how I came back. They chalked it up to luck, science, or coincidence. But I knew better. This wasn't coincidence. This was divine intervention. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, one thought kept running through my mind. Why me? Why had I been given this second chance when so many others weren't? The answer didn't come immediately, but deep in my heart, I knew there was a reason. I wasn't the same person who'd stepped into that car before the accident. I'd been changed, not just saved. When I was discharged from the hospital, I didn't return to my old life. How could I? I couldn't just go back to ignoring God, living like none of it mattered. Everything mattered now. Every choice, every word, every action had a weight I couldn't ignore. I was alive for a purpose, and that purpose was clear: to share what I'd experienced and warn others before it was too late. I started telling my story to anyone who would listen. At first, it was hard. How do you describe something so unexplainable, so raw? But I realized this wasn't about me, it was about the message. People needed to know that there's more to life than just going through the motions. There's eternity at stake, and the decisions we make today determine what happens tomorrow. I'm not the same person I used to be. My priorities have shifted completely. Things I used to chase, money, status, comfort, don't mean anything to me now. My focus is on living a life that honors the one who saved me, the one who pulled me out of the darkest place imaginable and gave me hope. And now I'm here sharing this with you. If you're watching this, it's not by accident. You were meant to hear the story. I went through what I did so I could warn you, so you wouldn't have to experience the same thing. You don't have to wait until it's too late to change. God is waiting for you just like He was waiting for me. It doesn't matter where you've been or what you've done. His grace is bigger than anything you could imagine. Don't wait until you're out of time. Choose Him now. He's ready to change your life, just like He changed mine. If you've made it this far, thank you. It means this message was meant for you. I believe with all my heart that you're here for a reason, and I pray that my story has spoken to you in a way that words alone cannot. You're not here by chance. There's something greater at work in your life. If this story touched you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Together, we can spread this message of hope and transformation. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a testimony like this. You never know whose life might be changed just by hearing these stories. Before we go, I want to leave you with this. No matter where you are in life, no matter what you've been through, it's never too late to turn things around. God's grace is big enough to cover anything you've done, and His love is strong enough to pull you out of whatever darkness you're facing. Let me pray for you. Father, I ask that you touch the heart of every person listening to this. Show them your love and remind them that they are never forgotten. Give them the courage to take that first step toward you and the strength to trust in your plan. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you for being here, and God bless you.